Hello again. In the previous episode, I lifted the engine and gearbox out of the car. In this episode, I'm going to cover three things. One is separating the bell housing and the gearbox from the engine. The second is organising and refurbishing the parts that have been taken off the engine so that they're properly organised before I strip down this engine bay any further. The third is about workshop organisation. So I want to make sure that I don't lose any parts and stay thoroughly organised, so I'm going to get stuck into that. This is Fosseway Classic Car Workshop, 1967 E-Type restoration. There's a few things that are worth pointing out on this before I take the bell housing and gearbox off. The cylinder head isn't the original one from the car. So you can see from these ribbed cam covers, this is actually from a later engine. It's either a Series 1 4.2 XJ or a later E-Type. Hopefully as we take things apart we'll actually find out what the real provenance of this cylinder head is. But it is the original block for the car. Another thing to notice here is that the inlet manifold, these were specific to the E-Type. It's different to what's fitted to the Mark X in that it goes down here to be able to cope with the curvature at the front of the car. So that provides clearance to the underside of the bonnet. One of the things I quite like about this is really how small the gearbox itself is. It is just this unit here. I suppose only having 4 forward ratios and 1 reverse can allow it to be small. Then you've got the bell housing here, so you've got the flywheel attached to the engine, you've got the clutch mechanism here. If you compare this to the engine in episode 16, where I was at Classic Engine Workshop, there's obviously a lot of work to be done to this to get it to the same state, but it's entirely possible. So let's set about getting these separated from the engine. Before I take the bell housing and the gearbox off the car though, it makes sense to take the starter motor off now that it's accessible. The starter motor is held on with a couple of bolts, both with 9/16 nuts on the end of them. This one's quite accessible here, so pretty easy to remove. The second one, you can just get a spanner in there, so that's pretty good as well. Interesting to note that there's a spacer here between the bell housing and the starter motor, so I just need to make sure I keep that together and put the nuts and the washer straight back on. The bell housing and gearbox aren't actually resting on anything at the moment because the whole assembly is resting on the sump of the engine. So I'm just going to slot these things underneath, got some here, just to give it some support so that it doesn't fall off, and load up the nuts and bolts as I undo the bell housing from the engine. The last thing holding the gearbox onto the engine is this cover plate here, so that's mainly really to stop rubbish getting into the bell housing, flywheel and clutch area. So obviously this part of the engine is exposed underneath, so it's just 4 set screws here and I'll be able to lift this plate out. With that cover plate out of the way, I should be able to pull the bell housing away from the engine. Now that we can see inside the bell housing, you can see the spline shaft here, that's the input shaft for the gearbox. And then this is what happens when you press your foot on the clutch pedal to engage and disengage the clutch. This is just taking out the cover plate that I undid a few moments ago. You can now collect up and store carefully all of the fixings that attach the bell housing and the cover plates. Those can be cleaned up, replated, refurbished for use again when it comes to rebuild. I now need to take this inlet manifold off. All the nuts and all the washers are out of the way, but for some reason it's stuck fast to the cylinder head. So I'm going to have to work out a way to try and pry it off, because this is aluminium. I don't really want to go hitting it with a hammer because it will damage it, and this won't be cheap or easy to replace. So what I'm going to do is modify a slide hammer I've got, which is actually for dent pulling in this case, to try and attach to these studs here and try and pull it off this way. So what I'm intending to do now that I've taken this off the end of the slide hammer is I've found a large nut that's of the same thread, and I'm going to try and fit this bolt in. So if I get several nuts welded together, and those will act as a bridging piece, basically a really long extended nut to go between this and the studs on the inlet manifold. I'm going to start by cutting off this end of the nut because it's not threaded and it's got the nylock in it, and I want to be able to weld to this. Really need that out of the way. So I've got the sliding hammer disassembled in the vise here with the nut that I've just cut back on top and the bolt placed on top of that. So this should be able to, this earth here will work fine. I now need to weld several nuts together on the bolt here. So I've just ground back the worst of the welds there. I don't really need this to be pretty, I just need it to be effective. So here's my crude homemade tool. Now I'm going to attach it to the manifold and see if it works. Definitely not guaranteed, but it's definitely worth a try. Try it there, I'll try it on another stud. Work my way around. Unfortunately, my slide hammer puller idea hasn't worked. There's simply too much holding this manifold onto the head still. So what I'm going to have to do is remove each of the studs, and I'm doing that by locking two nuts together on the stud and then slowly unwinding. So it's going to be a slow process, unfortunately. I've now removed all but 3 of the studs, and the ones that are remaining I can see a gap round, so I don't think they're going to be much of a problem. So I'm now going to have a go at using the puller again to see if I can get this manifold off. Oh, really stuck on well that. Pleased to have that off. With the inlet manifold off, I can now finally get this exhaust manifold off as well. So there's just one nut that I couldn't get at when the engine was still in the car. So with the access much better now, I can get in there and try and undo it. The risk of rounding these off is very significant when you can't really see what you're doing, and because they're brass nuts, that makes it even worse. These 1/2 inch spanners aren't really fitting, so I've got my metric ones out as well, which, yes, that 13mm spanner goes on okay, but it looks like it's just going to round it off. I'll keep experimenting to see what works. I'm going to use this Dremel with this little cut-off disc to cut through the brass nut. Shouldn't be too difficult or take too long. It's just not very easy to access. Because it's brass, I should just be able to, oh, I've got a split in it, tap it out of position. There we go, there's nearly half the nut. There's that tricky manifold. It would be one of the most difficult to access ones that causes you grief. Anyone who's worked on cars, or classic cars in particular, will tell you that the smallest thing can really hold you back sometimes, and this was one of them. Final bit to remove is this little bracket that holds on the HT leads before they go over onto the cylinder head. You can see here the rubber's perished, but the little metal bracket can be refurbished, no problem. Just this inlet gasket to take off now, the exhaust gasket as well. I'm now going to take the engine to Classic Engine Workshop in Redditch. First of all, I need to get it into the car. Part organisation must be an important part of a successful project, and I really don't want to be overwhelmed by the parts that are still attached on the frame here. So all of the suspension, heater box, and everything else you can see. In anticipation of needing somewhere to store all of those, I built some large shelves along the top here and got some large storage boxes to put them in. I bought sheets of 13 by 28 centimetre acrylic. I'm just drilling out the corners here so they can rivet them onto the front of the box there. I can now start to put my new storage system to use. So I'm not planning on doing anything with the interior trims. The centre console parts, these door handles, the seat belts, and the gear shift gator and gear knob can all go away and be labelled up. I've got myself some dry white markers so I can reuse this. So I'm going to use this box for all of the cooling hoses. I want to keep the old ones because it's just a really good reference when you get the new ones. The Jubilee clips might be possible to reuse. So I don't throw anything away until I've got the replacements and I know it's going to work. And obviously these are filthy, so there's a steel pipe in the middle here. Again, that's a reference. If I might be able to refurbish this, I need to check it over, but let's keep it all together for now. Heater hoses here. I'm sure you can get stainless steel replacements for these now rather than these mild steel ones with rust coming through. But again, it's really valuable to have these pipes with the elbows and everything as a reference. Look, I'll put this fuel hose in with the cooling hoses as well. Put the gearbox breather hose there, and then each of these overflow hoses for the carburetors. And a little vacuum hose that goes between the distributor and the manifold as well. So I've got a steel pile, an aluminium pile and a couple of bits of fiberglass. I've got several of the steel parts here that I'm going to put in the sandblaster. And these brackets that hold the radiator header tank on. This is the alternator shield, pulley here, and these are return spring brackets for the carburetors. I'm in the process of building a more suitable part spraying booth, but for the moment this cardboard box with a few wires hung around to suspend the parts as I prime them will be perfectly suitable for now. Because this has got a later head on it, the plan is to replace these ribbed cam covers with the pair that we've got just here. So this one here, obviously before it's been refurbed, this one here has been polished by someone in the past that bought it from, but it is just a like-for-like replacement, isn't it? Yeah. So while we're here, we're going to get these things in the Vapor Blaster. So this one, being a bit more ugly, I think you suggested Vapor Blasting the whole lot, but of course, because of this, get it through the degreaser first so that you don't clog up your Vapor Blaster.
Yeah.
This one's just the inside surface there as well, so that's quite tidy. This one, I think that could go straight in.
Again, yeah, well, we'll probably give that a vapor straight into the vapor blast, so clean it all out on the inside, and then this vapor blasting over these surfaces just makes it easier to polish, especially getting into the corners where the polisher doesn't necessarily do so well, and we can do that. You run the vapor blast on a very low pressure, it almost gives a polished finish, so you can kind of get into the corners quite easily on that one.
And then this gasket material off and all studs out.
Yeah, so we remove all steel parts because they just go rusty once they've been through the vapor blast, so they'll be sent off to electroplates if we can reuse them if they look like they're in good shape. Otherwise they're relatively easy to obtain replacements. And again, we'll just bend the tab washers back on these ones and undo this, and this linkage rod comes out, and there's a thermostat sort of temperature sender, a couple of little core plugs, and then these two hose stubs at the end, which is a little tip. You can use a spark plug socket to remove. That's happens to be the right size.
So here's everything from the inlet manifolds and the cam covers, just about to go into the vapor blaster. Here's the thermostat housing. Let's see how these turn out.